usher the last few folks in.
Hanukkah, oi Hanukkah, Jantif Ashena, lustige, freiliche, nicht nur nach seine, alle Nacht in Tredlech spielen wir. Frische Hesselatkas, Essen an der Schir, geschwindet sind Kinder, die Hanukkah lichtlich singt alla Nisim und danken für den Nisim und kommt Kirche tanzen und kommt. Singt alla Nisim und danken für den Nisim und kommt Kirche tanzen und kommt. One for each night they shed a sweet light to remind us of days long ago. One for each night they shed a sweet light to remind us of days long ago. Hanukkah, oi Hanukkah, Jantif Ashena, lustige, freiliche, nicht nur nach seine, alle Nacht in Tredlech spielen wir. Frische Hesselatkas, Essen an der Schir, geschwindet sind Kinder, die Hanukkah lichtlich singt alla Nisim und danken für den Nisim und kommt Kirche tanzen und kommt. Singt alla Nisim. Hanukkah.
And that's that. Thank you for joining us this evening for this URJ Small Congregation Collaborative, at which 8 different colleagues and 7 different colleagues and 1 different colleague to be, if you were treated enough to be on Saturday night, when Shoshana Nambi, who is, we call Erev Rab, just before she's becoming a rabbi, ordained in May, 8 of us have gotten together to present 8 nights of candle lighting and Hanukkah and stories and song and so forth. So I hope you've enjoyed what has happened so far. I'm going back to the old country because done a lot of thinking this year. It's been a rough year, I think, for all of us, for celebrating Hanukkah, for celebrating light, and thinking about how we bring in light and what it reminds us of. I was fortunate enough to be at a meeting with our esteemed leader, Rabbi Rick Jacobs, who shared a slide, or shared a picture with us that I'd like to share with you and tell you a little bit of the story of the picture itself. Thinking about how we shine light in those dark times and those dark places, and this is certainly an example of that. One could say from the old country and from quite some time ago, but not so long ago that we have forgotten. So I'm going to share this, and if you'll give me a thumbs up if you can see it, great. And I'm going to elect someone to read. I'm so glad to see my colleague and friend Susan Burden here. So how about you read the screen for us? Just unmute.
Okay, Rabbi. Hanukkah 1932. It was on a Friday afternoon right before Shabbat that this photo was taken. My grandmother realized that this was a historic photo, and she wrote on the back of the photo that their flag wishes to see the death of Judah, but Judah will always survive, and our light will outlast their flag. My grandfather was the rabbi of the Kiel community. My grandfather fled Germany in 1933 and moved to Israel. His community came to the train station to see him off, and before departed, he urged his people to flee Germany while there's still time. That was written by Yehuda Mansfield.
Yeah. So you can see that the Hanukkah is in the window, like we're supposed to put the Hanukkah in our windows to display the miracle, or display our identity as Jews and our celebration of Hanukkah. And you see that across the street, just across the street, even before he was elected, there was a Nazi party, and across the street is this Nazi flag, this banner, which is being talked about. Has anyone seen this photo before? Has anyone recognized it? It's actually, yeah, Virginia, where did you see it? In pictures, or have you seen it in its
In pictures, and
Yeah.
I've seen it. I think it's, I've seen all the inscriptions from, I guess, from the Holocaust Museum.
Yeah, so it's actually this actual photo, as well as that Hanukkah itself, lives full-time, minus a little bit, full-time at Yad Vashem in Israel, the place where we have an incredible museum and memory and dedication to those who perished in the Holocaust in Israel. And it comes home to the family the generations, the offspring of the grandfather who's spoken about in this quote. It comes to the family, the Posner family, to celebrate each year and to light the Hanukkah during Hanukkah, and then goes back to Yad Vashem, the actual Hanukkah, the Hanukkah menorah. So just a really incredible testament of our past, of shining light in a very dark time, and the resilience of the Jewish people. So after having seen that slide, I'll stop sharing for a moment. After having seen that slide, I started to think about my own history, and some of you who are from the congregation that I have the honor of leading part-time, Congregation B'nai Israel in Fayetteville, Georgia, know my family story. But hopefully this will add a new dimension to it. I'd kind of forgotten about a few of these things. So for those of you who don't know, my mom is Danish and was born and raised in Denmark. Her family goes quite a bit, several generations back in Denmark. And my whole family is still there. My kids joke, like, who'd leave Denmark? Yeah, exactly. So I visited a lot when I was growing up, and had the pleasure of getting to know all my aunts and my uncles, my great aunts and uncles, my grandmother, my grandfather, who are no longer living at this point. I still have an uncle who's alive. My mom is still living. They can tell stories about Denmark. But my mom can't really tell a story of her first couple of Hanukkah celebrations. She was born in June of 43. The Nazis had already begun to occupy Denmark, and they had to evacuate. I'm sure many of you know the story that the Danish Jews there was a very rich underground in Denmark, and the Danish Jews had to flee because they were going to be rounded up. Even though they'd been occupied for more than a year, there was a decision by the Nazis, the SS, to gather up the Jews who lived in Denmark and take them to a concentration camp. As it happened, they fled. And they fled to Sweden with the help of the Danish government, with the help of an incredible underground and a lot of very, very benevolent people. However, a small group of the 6,000 or so Jewish residents in Denmark, a small group ended up going to Terezin. And Terezin was like a ghetto. It was ghettoized on one side and a death camp really on the other side. And the Danes were used as models basically model for propaganda. So the Nazis would take videos of the Danes, the children playing soccer, and the adults who didn't look starved, and so forth. And there was one Danish man in particular. Actually, he wasn't Danish. There was one man in particular who was an artist who came from Germany, who was at Terezin, and he helped set up there were a few different areas where they could set up these little synagogues so they could shine their light during this darkest of times. They set up these small, I guess they weren't synagogues, but prayer spaces all around Terezin, where they could hide in garages, in cellars, and in storage rooms, and in some cases in an area of the dormitories where they were kept. And they really gave the Jewish prisoners some solace and some hope for survival through prayer. If any of you have heard of Regina Jonas, she was actually the first woman rabbi that we know of who was ordained during the Holocaust, and she was at Terezin as well. So I want to show you a picture of the Danish their efforts to create a little synagogue. This is kept exactly the way it was left at the end of the Second World War, at the end of the Holocaust, when Terezin was liberated. But this is one of those secret synagogues. And it was created, in this case, in a storage room by that artist. His name was Artur Berlinger. And he was a Jewish community leader, and he converted it from a simple kind of utilitarian space into a meaningful place for Terezin's Jews. Using the materials and supplies from a workshop that he was, forced labor, he used his skills when he could as a calligrapher and a painter, and adorned the walls with murals and Hebrew texts, as you can see, to create a secret and sacred place in this awful, horrific, unholy time. So in 1944, 2 years after he arrived, he in fact was deported to Auschwitz, and his wife and Bertha and he both perished in Auschwitz. But the Danish Jews remained there, and they were liberated and came back to Denmark. All but 50 of the 500 who went there survived and came back to Denmark. Among them were my great-grandfather and my great-grandmother, who didn't leave Denmark when they were given the opportunity and were rounded up and went to Terezin. There's a lot more to that story, but I shan't continue it. I do want to show you that there's a student who this year, over the course of 22 and 23, created this replica, full-size replica of the original hidden Danish Terezin prayer space. We could call it a synagogue, I think. The space was very carefully recreated. He went there, and his name's Ethan Rogers, and he went there and did measurements and took copious amounts of photos and drawings, came back. He's a third-year architectural student at Northeastern University. And for me, this is just like the light of probably 2 or even 3 generations later, when someone took it upon himself to recreate a sacred space. So yeah, and then I guess this brings me to think about those years when there was Hanukkah in 1943 and 1944. My mom's first Hanukkah and her second Hanukkah were not spent in Denmark, where she subsequently grew up, but they were spent in Sweden. And I have actually a picture of her family. I don't know if this is actually Hanukkah, but they look like they're celebrating something. So I'm taking liberties and saying, this is her family. My mom was clearly the little teeny tiny one, the baby on her mom's lap. Behind her in the middle is her father. And then my great aunt, 2 great aunts, a great uncle, and my mom, one of my mom's siblings, and some cousins as well. So that was her first Hanukkah, and the second was spent there. And then they were, when the war ended in 1945, they came back to Denmark and were really, for the most part, greeted by their neighbors and their friends who kept a lookout for them. My mom has been the recipient of some of the Judaica, and I happen to have, and I'm hoping that y'all can see it, this little, I don't know, a Kiddush cup, a little Hanukkah, a juice cup, that is from my grandfather, who was born in 1901, and it says Hanukkah 1908, so obviously for his 7th birthday or so, 7th Hanukkah, he was given this little cup, which is etched, that says Hanukkah 1908. And I like to think, I don't know for sure, but I like to think that he was able to take, my grandfather was able to take that Hanukkah little cup with him to Sweden to escape and have a little piece of home with him when he celebrated those 2 years of Hanukkah. So we think about how do we bring light into the world when it seems like a very dark place. I earlier this week heard a quote, which is by the Bosnian writer Maria Popova, who is now an American citizen, and she's writing and reflecting on James Baldwin's work, which is called Nothing Personal. And she writes this beautiful, beautiful quote, which I think is really a wonderful, resounding kind of quote for this time of year for us as Jewish people in the Hanukkah, in the week of Hanukkah. So she writes, "The longer I live, the more deeply I learn that love, whether we call it friendship or family or romance, is the work of mirroring and magnifying each other's light. Love, whether we call it friendship or family or romance, is the work of mirroring and magnifying each other's light." And so I invite you to think about someone for whom you magnify their light and someone who helps to magnify your light in your life. And I invite you to light Hanukkah candles and sing along with me. Seem to be missing the shamash. One moment, please. We'll start that again. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Hanukkah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asa nisim lavoteinu bayamim ahem hazeh. Hanukkah Sameach. Happy Hanukkah to you all, and thank you for joining us on this Small Congregations Collaborative, and I hope to see you tomorrow.